You know, to me, rap music always just seemed like verbal stimming for undiagnosed hood rats. You mean to tell me you wear your clothes 3 sizes too big and you just gotta collect every color of the new Air Jordans? Ha! There's nothing on the spectrum about that at all. In any case, speaking of being on the spectrum, today we're going to discuss the secret technologies that have been used for decades by military and intelligence agencies to fake alien abductions. And in the process, I'm going to teach you all about a nearly unknown offshoot of MK Ultra that even the most seasoned researchers don't even realize existed. So hold on to your Palladians, I'm gonna bashar you upside the head with some brand new information. So we need to start by analyzing the classic alien abduction. And to do that, I've got my little example car here of Indiana Jones and Short Round. And we can imagine that Indy and Short Round are just driving their way through some country road in the middle of the night in, New Hampshire or something. And all of a sudden, their car stalls and comes to a stop. And isn't that just the classic UFO trope, where they're just driving along all happy, carefree, and hunky-dory until the lights start to flicker and the radio starts to go out, and then the whole car just sputters and spurts and dies right there in the dark, and they're left stranded in the middle of nowhere. Oh boy, call Spielberg, it's so spooky. Well, no, actually it's not. In fact, technology has existed since at least World War II that can turn off the electronics of a vehicle, of an aircraft, using electromagnetic energy. And to give you some proof that this existed way before the alien tropes even began, we're going to take a look at a book called Forgotten Creators: How German-Speaking Scientists and Engineers Invented the Modern World and What We Can Learn from Them by Todd Ryder. And what Ryder has done is he put together a masterwork of several thousand pages of wartime documentation and real-world historical sources showing just what the Germans had created as their wonder weapons and what happened to them after World War II. In Appendix C, he's got some really eye-opening information about advanced creations in directed energy. And I'm just going to read some of this to you because we've got some things here about electromagnetic pulses shutting down engines of aircraft and then automobiles. And we see that several Allied intelligence reports describe the development and successful testing of some sort of German electromagnetic pulse weapons capable of knocking out the electrical systems of engines and other electrical devices. We see incidents where planes were knocked out of the sky with no apparent cause, and a 1944 OSS report from Alan Dulles himself stating that the weapon is reported to consist of an apparatus by which the operation of motors in planes and tanks can be interrupted through some kind of secret long-distance interference by rays or waves. At the same time, it was reported that the experiments with this secret weapon had been successfully concluded and that production was to be started. That the Germans had a secret weapon that they called the Adlergerät, or the Eagle apparatus, which would paralyze any vehicle to a halt, and that this was demonstrated at proving grounds near Danzig in July of 1944, where an automobile was driven across the testing area and was brought to a complete standstill by the ray as if the spark of the vehicle had suddenly failed. Now that sounds an awful lot like what happens to these vehicles during an abduction. And that's not even the whole story, because technologies just like this were around well before the Germans ever started working on them. I've got this May 1929 Modern Mechanics and Inventions that shows an article where a gentleman is sitting here holding a little device that is a death ray that stops motors, and he was able to turn off the motor of a motorcycle using this little handheld beam device. In another issue of Modern Mechanics and Inventions from May 1932, we've got this death rays from Silent Sounds that shows a vehicle-mounted sound device that could do very similar things, including killing at a distance. And finally, in the same magazine, Modern Mechanics and Inventions, but a later issue from January 1935, we see this article on a German death ray pistol that stuns animals at a mile range. And again, this guy's holding a very small handheld device that could apparently put animals into a stupor from a mile away. And guess what? People are animals. So if he could do it to a rabbit or a guinea pig or who knows what, you could do it to a person as well if you knew what you were doing. And that brings us to the second part of an alien abduction, because once you've incapacitated their vehicle, you have to find some way to put the people into a stupor, to knock them out, so that Indy and Short Round are just here at the mercy of whatever nefarious alien beings want to come over and mess with their butthole. And this is where we introduce the little-known MK Ultra sub-project / offshoot that was known as MK Decoy. Many people have heard about MK Ultra and its associated projects like Bluebird, Artichoke, MK Naomi, Delta, Often, and Chickwit. But for some reason, accidentally on purpose, MK Decoy has been completely overlooked by just about every author and researcher I've seen up to this point. What later became known as MK Decoy was originally a project with the Office of Naval Research, where they were studying new and exciting ways to give people a concussion. But it wasn't just a normal study of concussions, like a normal sports injury or somebody who had been injured in the field or flying a jet or whatever. What they noticed is that people who got concussed, who got shell-shocked, tended to go into a state of consciousness where they lost their faculties, where you basically had control over them for a short term, and it was the beginnings of brainwashing. In fact, they say exactly that in their project proposal from 1955, where they're discussing using something called resonance cavitation in the human brain, and that excitation of this resonance cavitation by using a tuned driver or by tuned sound waves could create a neurotic-like manifestation that is normally associated with blast concussions, and that both of these methods could be used as a tool in brainwashing. So basically, they were trying to work out technologies that could shoot a resonant frequency at a person's head. It would go into resonance with your brain, and it would cause little microcavitations and bubbles in the cerebrospinal fluid. It would knock you out, it would put you in a disoriented state, and they could go in and they could tinker with your brain. A way of inducing an instantaneous hypnotic state in a victim from a distance. Once you've got them disoriented, you could go in and hypnotically program them with whatever you want. The original project was a Navy project, an Office of Naval Research project, which frankly explains all the butt stuff that had been done to all those abductees all those years. We all know how those Navy people are. In any case, this eventually got rolled up under MK Ultra and put under MK Ultra as MK Decoy. Other Navy projects like Chatter, which was also a brainwashing project, had also been brought into MK Ultra, but the Navy had been doing brainwashing research since well before World War II. Navy people and naval intelligence people have always been swarming around the UFO and psychic communities, putting out disinformation, misinformation to mislead people away from what they had been researching for many, many, many years into brainwashing, mind control, using their transmitters to transmit things as synthetic telepathy, etc. They always had a hand in this, and they have a big part to play in all of the lore and the misinformation that's been put out all these years about abductions to hide what they had actually been doing. When you start to go deep enough into real research that you start to pull out names of projects that other people haven't even mentioned before, you notice something very disturbing, and that's that the Navy and the Army and the FBI and NASA and the CIA all had their own brainwashing and MK projects, hypnosis projects, drug projects, projects using electromagnetics to induce these states in people. Though everybody always points their finger at the CIA, nobody ever points it at these other culprits and demands accountability. So when you see people with naval backgrounds or tied to the Navy pop up to spread UFO lore, people like Bill Cooper with his naval intelligence background, or Dolores Cannon, the hypnotist, who was married to a naval intelligence officer, or C.B. Scott Jones, who ran Rockefeller's UFO initiative, or Hal Puthoff, who was doing the remote viewing studies that probably weren't actually remote viewing and were more like synthetic telepathy, with his Navy and NSA background. You start to see these cretins come out of the woodwork, pushing the UFO lore, and all you start to see is what they're trying to hide. You notice how none of them ever bring up the very real human technology that can account for so much of the abduction phenomena. Instead, they want you to commit seppuku with Occam's razor and attribute it to aliens. Why? Because they were out here testing this stuff on people for decades. There are very real human victims that were tested on with these concussion weapons, with MK Ultra, with MK Chickwit, with all of these programs. And if they make you think that it was aliens, it lets them off the hook when these people should really be in federal prison. Believe me, I understand the desperate yearnings of the human soul for something greater and grander and more mysterious, so we're not all alone here on this little planet. But the reality is, people need to start doing better research and holding these sons of bitches accountable. Because while all the true believers are out there calling it aliens, you're letting them get away with human rights violations over decades that make Auschwitz look like a slumber party. And anybody that wants to whine at me because I'm not actively flattering you and your belief in aliens, I can prove that these technologies and these programs existed. We're still waiting for your proof that aliens do. I won't hold my breath.